Hello, everybody, again. Just wanted to say thank you for everybody for being as patient as you've been. For those of you who do kind of follow what it is that I do, I guess this is a way of reintroducing myself and introducing myself for those of you who don't or aren't familiar with me or what I do. My name's Eliott. I'm basically I'm a bass player by trade. Along the way, I've learned, I've touched on producing, keyboard playing, and I also want to qualify that I am a bass player, but I would like to say I really look at myself these days more as a musician because I think I'll use whatever means I deem necessary to get musical ideas and information out to you. So that said, I'm going to be posting some things here that are simply, it's nothing from a school or an institute or the think tanks that have so much to say about music, but it's about my personal experience, observation, and things that I feel are relevant and are credible that have been said throughout the music community in relation to music production, songwriting, and performing. And one of the things that I will talk about initially, being that I am a bass player, is the state of bass. Uh, Given the information that's out there, there's very few people who play bass or who listen to music for that matter who don't know who, many of the all-star greats in the way of bass are. Your Stanley Clarke, Marcus Miller, Victor Wooten, all these guys. And I just want to address where that's headed. One thing for sure is guys like Stanley, Vic, all of those guys were pioneers as far as making the bass stand out as a solo instrument. One of the things, though, that I see that's not really being addressed these days is the separation of bass as a solo instrument versus bass in the traditional role. And what I mean by that is, we have dual roles. I mean, as bass players, it's one of the coolest things in the world because for any band that's typically traditional as far as the rhythm section goes, we can get gigs. We can work all the time if we wanted to. At the same time, with those guys like your Stanley Clarks, Marcus Millers, those cats made it possible for us to go beyond that and be solo artists. So I think there's a dichotomy there to a degree because there's two sides to it. Typically, a setup that you would use as a bassist to back up a band, even more specifically to back up a vocalist, would not necessarily be what you would want to use if you are trying to do a solo thing. And I mean, again, that's totally subjective. It's based on my thoughts about the simple fact that the sound that you go for as a support for a vocalist or another lead instrument is just not going to be the same thing you're focusing on when you're trying to stand out. And I think for a lot of guys out there, people that are good to listen to, I mean, when I say listen, I mean really listen close to the production and the way that the music is produced, particularly the bass, the way it's mixed, the effects that are used. Listen to guys like Stanley Clarke. I mean, even to this day, I had a chance to see him about a year, maybe 2 years ago now at Chastain. And I mean, the guy just has a handle on how a bass should sound as a solo instrument. And it really belies what you would typically think of. I mean, in situations where maybe you're going to thump or do something like that, you kind of want to be able to ping pong back to the sound that you would use as a bassist behind somebody. But as far as really making the instrument speak, Clark really has a handle on it, and I really love him for that. The production aspect of it. Even Wayman and Marcus. I mean, you do hear with Wayman, you hear that fundamental sound, but you really hear a lot more. I mean, his use of reverb and compression live, it just makes the instrument just stand out. And as bass players, we have to do that. We have to find ways to make the instrument stick out, and especially live. Some guys have $3,000-$4,000 instruments, and they sound great, and they sound wonderful. But a lot of times in a live setting, if you don't address those issues of what do I need to do to get my bass to speak, and when I say speak, I mean to really stand out in the mix, you're going to have issues. I mean, I've experienced it myself because I've done, a lot of work as, as a solo musician as well. But even Marcus Miller, same thing. The guy is a producer, so he really has a good ear and a good take on what it requires to get a good bass sound as a solo instrument. And again, I keep stressing that because I don't think sound companies, instrument manufacturers are really addressing that. You think about a person that's a solo bassist, most of the tones that you get on a typical bass player's effects pedal are for backing people up. They're not really for solo bass. So I really think that needs to be addressed. Companies looking at making pedals and amps and cabinets that address a solo bassist, or at least that are flexible enough for a bassist that is a solo artist to be able to just take his rig out versus having to have a separate rig or specialized rig for a solo gig. I mean, most of the bass pedals that are out there really don't address that. So for a lot of my effects and a lot of things I use personally, they're actually digital effects made for guitar players because they are addressing the fact that these guys are going to be playing at this instrument, in a manner that's going to require good lead sounds. So I'm leaning towards that, using synthesizers and even, using my bass or designing sounds for my bass on my pedals that are closer to that. But that's just something to think about, because I think so many people are caught up now in sounding like other people, or as bassists we grab our instruments, we don't really give a lot of consideration to tone or to, as far as a solo instrument, to how we sound, that it suffers a lot. And people, they enjoy good bass solo, but if you're going to listen to bass for, an evening, you really want to have that addressed. And those are things I'll practically address as far as some of the videos that I'll put up, and I'll show you some of the gear that I'm using. But that's something I would love to see change. Maybe I could get involved in the process myself, but gear for solo bassists as opposed to just gear for guys that are backing people up, because they are two different monsters altogether. Well, just want to say peace again. I'll be back with some more information about what the plans are for this site. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.